Hello, students. In this presentation, we're going to be talking about Essay Writing 3, Introductions, Conclusions, and Titles. The order of this presentation, we'll be talking about developing academic titles, introduction paragraphs, conclusion paragraphs, and then we'll have a CAT, or a classroom assessment technique. I'll ask you some questions and see if you can answer them. First off, developing academic titles. When you're writing a title in the academic environment, there's a few things your title should do. First, your title should have a thought-provoking, original, and unique first portion that can relate creatively to the essay's content. So you want to have something new and unique, something that strikes your reader's interest, that sounds interesting and compelling. For example, food comas and ice cream headaches. That would pique my attention and make me want to see what this paper is about. Then, after the creative part, you should have a colon. And then after that colon, you should have a second portion that pertains to the text, your thesis, or your topic. Something that's more explicit about what the paper is going to be about. For example, the pains Americans go through for flavor. So when you put these two parts together, this particular title would be Food Comas and Ice Cream Headaches, the pains Americans go through for flavor. Now, the title of your paper should be centered at the top of your paper after your student information. It should be the same size as the rest of the paper. It should have proper capitalization as well. That means generally the first word will be capitalized, nouns, pronouns, and verbals will be capitalized, verbs, adjectives, and adjectives will be, or adverbs and adjectives will be capitalized as well. Now, when you're writing an academic title, there's a few things that you should not do. You should not restate the prompt wording. So if you've been given a specific prompt to write about, don't just say the same words as the prompt. You shouldn't also not just restate the assignment name. The assignment name goes with your student information. Your title should also avoid being too obvious or ordinary. You want it to be creative and unique. This is one of the places where you can really break out there and think of something awesome to invite your reader into your paper at the very beginning. You also want to make sure that you don't confuse your thesis, your topic, your main argument, your point, your key support, or any other technical term with your title. Sometimes students confuse their title with their thesis and interchange those words, but those are two separate things. Your title should not have larger or smaller font sizes. Your title in general should not have stylized fonts, such as italics, underlining, or bold. Most often I see students sometimes trying to italicize their title to make it stand out. They might bold their title to make it stand out, or underline it to make it stand out. And that is something that they should not do. And the reason is this. If you put your own title in italics, or if you underline it, that suggests that your title not only is the title of something that's a long work, it also suggests that it's been published before. So since your essay is actually for a paper in class and has not been published, it should not have any specialized formatting. The only time that you should have some specialized formatting, like italics or underlining in your title, is like in this example in the pink. In this example, there is a large work that's being mentioned directly in the title of the essay title. And because it's the title of something else, then it should be formatted correctly. So in the case of the exciting realism of Downton Abbey is the name of a TV show. So to show your readers that that is a large work, it's italicized. And that's correct in this title. because in this case, it's referring to something specific. You notice how the rest of the title of the essay is not italicized. You also should use quotation marks correctly. And this is the same sort of thing. Quotation marks in MLA suggest that the piece is a short work, not a long or large work. So if you're using the name of a song or a poem or a short story or an article, you would put that title in quotation marks. So like in this example at the bottom, Inspiration and Determination in Beyonce's Survivor. Survivor is the name of a song by Beyonce, and because the song is a short work, I'm putting that in quotation marks. You notice that the whole title's not in quotation marks, only the name of the song, okay? Because that's the title of the song that is in my own title of the essay. That's why that is in quotation marks. Nothing else should be in quotation marks. So here are some examples of academic titles. You don't want your title to ask a question. It's too informal. So here's Why Empire's Worth Watching. Instead, you might want to change that to Off Rhymes and Sharps, Exposing Negative Stereotypes in Empire. You notice again that I'm mentioning the title of the TV show that I'm going to be analyzing in the paper, and that's why Empire is in italics. Being a Nurse in Today's Religious Hospital. That's kind of a boring title. Instead, you might want to revise it to something like this: Where Passion and Compassion Cross, Unspoken Requirements of Today's Nurses in Religious Affiliated Hospitals. Here's another one. Topic 3, Worth of College. That's kind of boring, don't you think? Instead, change it to something like Skyrocketing Returns by Crunching College, The cost-benefit analysis still shows college is worth the risk. How about Bike Lanes Need Reform? Instead, you might want to change it to this: Avoiding Chicago's Crash Course, The urgent need for bike lane reform. So you notice in all of these improved titles, we have proper capitalization, and you might think to yourself, but those are too long. In the academic setting, this is the type of title that your instructors are going to be looking for. You might at times be compelled to use either just the interesting and creative first part, or just the more explicit second part. I urge you to use both. That will create the best and most compelling title in the academic environment. Now, introduction paragraphs. The introduction does a few things. It begins with an attention grabber, which is often called a lead or a hook. In my class, I tend to call it your AG. Your introduction paragraph, depending on your assignment, might have a counter argument. That's particularly the case if you're writing a persuasive essay. Your introduction paragraph should also transition well from the AG to the thesis, or from the AG to the counter argument and then the thesis, depending on the type of paper that you're writing. And your introduction should always end with a multi-part explicit thesis. So if this is your paragraph, you notice that it has sort of a layered effect. It begins with the attention grabber, it'll transition, and then go on to the thesis. So there are various attention-grabbing strategies that you can use. The first one we'll talk about is a startling statement, fact, or idea. In this type of strategy, you're beginning with something that will surprise your reader. Here's an example. Although it may be difficult to believe, the Golden Arches are a more recognizable symbol across the globe than the Christian cross, and the only fictional character recognized more readily than Ronald McDonald is Santa Claus. These are both startling statements or facts because it seems odd that Christianity, one of the major pillars of religion in this entire world, is often is less recognized than the symbols of McDonald's. This is a surprising thing for most people and would be a good statement, fact, or idea to invite your reader into an essay that has something to do with this. Sometimes you might want to invite your reader into your essay with an authoritative quote. These can sometimes be difficult to find, and you want them to be very relevant to your essay. But you want to make sure that they're from a person that's worth listening to, some sort of authority. You want to make sure that the person is well known and credible. And with this kind of attention grabber, the quote needs to feel kind of unequivocal and true, sort of universal. And it must be related to the context of the essay. That's really important. You can't have a quote that's about freedom and liberty and then an essay about, let's say, being a dog catcher. Okay? You need to have them be related. So here's an example. According to the Wall Street Journal's report on executive salaries, Steve Jobs earned only $1 a year as CEO of Apple Inc. So this is authoritative because it is set up by the Wall Street Journal, and it's a quote from them, and it's also it's authoritative because it's related to something that the Wall Street Journal knows a lot about, which is business and salaries. You may also choose a pithy quote. Pithy means humorous. With this, you want the person being quoted to be well known, and you also want it to be relevant and amusing. And also, of course, it should be related to the content of the essay. So, for an example, you might begin an essay with this quote from Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin once said, quote, "Outside a dog, a book is man's best friend. But inside a dog, it's too dark to read." This is a pithy quote because it's humorous. It's playing off the idea of inside and outside. It's playing a word game here. But this would have to be related somehow to whatever it is that you're talking about in your essay. Another type of attention grabber is an eye-catching image. You might want to describe a scene or situation for your reader, and this is one of my favorites because it can really drop your reader right into a setting, a situation, using sensory detail that will make the writing come to life. And readers like to feel like they're enveloped in writing. So if you do this right away and get them hooked into the scene that you're setting, they'll likely stay with you for quite a while in your essay. So here's an example. As the brilliant crimson sun sets down over the warm water of western Hawaii, one would not guess that beneath these crystal clear waters, the reefs are withering away like autumn leaves on a midwestern maple tree in October. What makes this example effective is some of the word choice. So we're giving brilliant colors like crimson. We're giving sensory detail like that of warm water. We're giving a specific location like Hawaii. But we're also giving another location comparing a contrast to Hawaii, which is lush and green and warm, with Midwestern October when the maple trees colors turn and the leaves fall. So we're creating two different worlds here and comparing it so that the reader can walk away or begin thinking about the reefs in Hawaii that are dying. And it's very effective because it's pulling all of these things together at once. Another is a contradiction. A contradiction sets up a dilemma or piques the interest of the reader because what seems to be true is actually not true. So in this case, the example is, it may seem that making a product illegal would make it hard to obtain. But in the drug trade, the illegality of drugs make them all the more readily available. So this is setting up the dichotomy here, the contradiction between two things. Not what you would expect is not in fact true. A personal anecdote is sort of like an eye-catching image or scene. The personal anecdote can bring writing to life because you're describing something that happened to yourself. Sometimes you might write an anecdote about something that happened to someone else, and that's true. That can be just as powerful, especially if you employ sensory detail and that paints a picture for the reader. Here's an example. As I walked into the McDonald's, my mouth watered because I smelled those crisp, delectable fries bubbling in the hot oil and saw the soda bubbling over the white waxed paper cups. The teenage girl behind the counter asked sweetly, "What can I get you today?" And I was about to tell her my usual, the order I've been ordering at McDonald's for years, a Big Mac, a large fry, and a medium Coke, when suddenly I couldn't give the order. I stammered. "Are you okay?" she asked. I said yes, but I stumbled out of the restaurant. This personal anecdote is like a very short story. That's what anecdotes do. They recount a very simple and short story. But in this story, a lot happens in just these few sentences. There's a lot of color, there's a lot of imagery, and we're seeing something and we're wondering, why on earth did this person stumble out of the McDonald's? It leads us into that question, and it wants us to know the answer. It compels us to want to know the answer and keep reading. That's the purpose of these attention grabbers, is to get your reader to continue to read. So there's a few things that you shouldn't do when you have an attention grabber. Now, different people agree and disagree on some of these points. And so as an instructor myself, these are the things that I hold important and value as a writing instructor and ask you not to do. Now, another instructor might say that it's fine, but for me, these are things that I, as someone who studied particularly writing and creative writing, I want you to avoid because I feel that they're ineffective, and that as a college writer, you should be able to use a more effective and more interesting strategy than these. So, the first one, please do not question your reader directly. So you don't want to begin your essay with something like, "Have you ever thought about what happens to your trash after it's put in the garbage can?" Don't question them directly. That does not work. And here's a couple reasons why. First, it addresses your reader much too informally. You don't want to speak to your reader in the second person. And when you ask a direct question of your reader, you are. And talking directly to your reader, it's too informal in an academic college essay. Moreover, if you ask your reader a direct question, you must anticipate that many readers might not answer the question in the way that you want. It really works against you if your reader doesn't answer how you want them to. So if your reader read this question about trash and said, "Nope, I've never thought about it," that's probably not the answer you want. You probably want them to think, "Oh, yeah," or "No," or maybe you don't know. What you should do in this case is try to turn those questions into statements. You also don't want to announce your topic. Announcing is much too obvious, and it's not very interesting. An announcement is an example like this. In this essay, I'm going to explore what happens to the trash we put in the garbage can and what it means for society. Okay, this is much too obvious. If you just actually explore what happens to trash and explain what it means for society in your analysis, your reader will follow along with you. You don't need to tell them that you're going to do that. Okay, and then your explicit thesis. Your explicit thesis should end your introduction paragraph. Your explicit thesis is one sentence statement that identifies a topic of the essay, expresses the main argument, point, main idea, or controlling idea of the essay. Sometimes you'll hear various terms for this concept, and it will indicate specific key support for that essay. Your thesis, where does it go? It should always be the last sentence of your introduction. Now, some people may disagree with that and other writing teachers, but in general, this is the standard for most academic writing, that it should be the last sentence of your introduction. Okay, now your conclusion paragraphs. When we think about the conclusion, your conclusion gives closure to your essay. It makes the reader feel satisfied about the entire reading experience, and it should leave a lasting impression. So we're going to look at some ways to do those things. So one thing you might want to do in your conclusion is ask these questions or answer these questions. What does this mean, and why does this matter? When you ask those questions of yourself and then answer them in your conclusion, you will bring greater relevancy to what you've been talking about in your essay. You'll show that what you've been exploring in your paper goes beyond just you, that it's important beyond just the scope of your paper. And it will allow you to give some meaning about what your analysis or argument suggests, implies, or means beyond those pages. So here's an example. Some may think that it's arbitrary that Kingsolver writes in the way that she does. Some may think that it doesn't matter the writing style that she uses or the words that she chooses. However, it does. Although her book attempts to challenge the status quo of the food situation in the United States by reaffirming a wealthy, landowner-centered rhetoric, she continues to promulgate the extremes in U.S. society. The rhetoric naturalizes the right of the privileged to have the best, while those without land have less. This makes the spirit of activism in the book fall flat, and it likely will not cause the masses without land to be able to get out of their urban apartments and into the dirt. So in this example, this writer is looking at what it means after the writer has explored the rhetoric of this book by Barbara Kingsolver. And it's coming to a final conclusion about it, of what it means and why it matters to study the rhetoric of a book, which is really important because you're often asked to write rhetorical analysis in college, and you don't do those just for no reason. You have to come to some conclusion about why the rhetoric matters, or whatever it is that you're talking about in your paper, why that matters. Another strategy you might have is echoing the introduction. You often don't want to leave your introduction dangling, especially if you have a really good one. If you bring back your idea that you started off with, it'll bring relevancy and expand upon the strategy that worked for you in the beginning. For example, you might write, "Stumbling out of McDonald's that day made the information I had learned real to me. It made me realize that the only way a difference is going to be made is by making a conscious choice to say no to big food." And you'll see that this is sort of the echo of the personal narrative introduction that we saw earlier. Another is an anecdote. Another, which is we saw already, where you gave a very short story that helps call an image to mind for the reader to think about as the paper ends. Here's an example. Today, as I drive past the throngs of fast food restaurants, I may still be seduced by the enchanting fragrance of the fries wafting to greet me in the car. I still want to pull over. I may still want to stop. I may still love the taste of McNuggets. But now that I know what they are, where they come from, who they exploit, I'm strong enough to drive by instead of drive through. Another conclusion strategy is the call to action, or the challenge action. You might make suggestions that your readers can use or follow to make a difference, but you want to make sure that you're still talking about that, not in the second person. You want to talk either from the first person or from the third person. And of course, when I say the first person, I mean the first person singular, not the first person plural. So here's an example. It's true that voting in local elections might seem like too much work, but local aldermanic races are truly one of the highest impact votes a Chicagoan can make to improve the city and make a difference. The only way corruption will end in the city is if its citizenry steps up to the ballot and makes a choice. I know I want to make a difference. I hope other Chicagoans do too. You might also want to try the look forward strategy. This is when you imagine what life would look like if your argument or what you've been talking about in your paper panned out or became reality. How would life be different? Is it positive or negative? Set that up so the reader can walk away with that image. For example, if the advertising ban goes through, Saturday morning would look so different. Millions of children would flip through the channels without having their minds infiltrated by hooks that make them objects of terms like cradle to grave. No, they'll be just children. Children watching silly shows for pure entertainment value. That's the world I want to live in. So, a couple of do nots. Just like your intro, please do not question your reader directly. For example, can you imagine what life will be like if we let this happen? Don't ask that question. Okay, it's too informal and it works against you. In this case, paint that picture for your reader. Don't ask them to imagine, paint it for them. You also don't want to over-signal. Okay, over-signaling is sort of like that person who puts on their turn signal 3 miles before they're about to turn. You don't want to do that, okay? And in a college paper, you don't want to put any of these things in your conclusion. You don't want to begin your conclusion with a phrase like "in conclusion," "to conclude," or even "to sum up what I've been discussing." Okay? Please do not do that. These things are too obvious. I can tell as your reader, and your reader can tell that you're going to conclude if you in fact do conclude. By the time we get to the end of your paper, we can see that your paper is ending. So we know that the end is nigh. So if you actually conclude successfully, you don't need these signal phrases to let us know that you're doing it. It will be obvious to us. Also, please do not be redundant. Do not just restate your thesis. In conclusion, the novel is boring because it's full of trivial facts, poorly written, and predictable. If that was your thesis, you don't want to just restate that. These essays in general are short. The longest paper you might be asked to write in one of my classes is 10 pages. You should assume that your reader can remember what your thesis was on page 1 when they get to page 10. If you've actually been writing about your thesis throughout the body of your paper, your reader will remember what you've been talking about. So you don't need to restate your thesis. You need to do more than that. There is one exception, however, to that rule. If you are ever in a timed environment, such as an exit essay or in a proctored exam, and you're being asked to write under the gun of the timer, and you're about to run out of time, it is okay then to just reword your thesis and stick it at the end, because in the end, it's better to have something for your conclusion than nothing. So even if your conclusion is ineffective and it fails, it's better to have a failing grade than a 0, right? 5 points out of 10 is better than 0 out of 10. Okay, so for your review, see if you can answer these questions. And then go back through the presentation to see what your answers are. What are 2 introduction strategies? How should you not begin an introduction? What are 2 conclusion strategies? What should you not do in a conclusion? How many parts should a title have? What should you not do in an essay title? Okay, thank you students for spending time with me today. I hope you found this presentation informative, and if you have any questions, let me know.